I woke up with a sudden gasp and a reflexive jerk. My whole body reeled back from another one of those micro-sleep-induced dreams, the ones where you slip and fall into the abyss, only to end up being propelled back to the waking world. I was too groggy to make heads or tails about where I was, but I didn't need to. Even though everything was weirdly hazy, the dread of a deadline and the fear of sleeping on another assignment was more than enough of a reminder to my current situation. I rubbed my eyes to find myself surrounded by the tasteful furnishings of the wood accents and clean lines of a room dominated by mid-millennium aesthetics. It was another late night at the IAS staff-only rec room, and I needed to get this assignment done stat. So, with a tired breath and another quick rub of my eyes, I went straight back into it, reading what little I wrote in hopes of getting inspired to keep on writing. Human tenacity knows no boundaries, but... Bet this hasn't been without its price. Another voice suddenly interrupted. Such as staying up all night in the rec room, for no good reason at 3 AM on a weekday. A cocksure, playfully dismissive voice, belonging to one of the many instructors at the IAS on loan for the military. Except instead of the usual rank-and-file army officers, the man was LREF. That much was obvious, though, by the way he talked, walked, and carried himself, as everything about him screamed Space Explorer bad boy. This decade stereotype for a bunch of the military, steeped in as much historical prestige as it was marred in gross overspending. The gold-trimmed blue cloaks they wore didn't really do much to deter from that latter stereotype. Though, to be fair, gold hasn't had the same appeal ever since mega-foundries started roaring to life en masse. Captain Lee, sir. At ease, at ease. Save the salutes and what have yous for Phil Captain McKay. It's late anyways. You really shouldn't be up right now. Overexertion's a heck of a thing, you know. Yes, sir, but... But what? Permission to speak freely, sir? Granted. I don't think my sleep-deprived stints hold a candle to what the labs and fabs have been up to for the past 2 decades, sir. Everyone's been putting their all into this, and I don't want to be the weakest link. Let me stop you right there. First, you're not the weakest link, all right? He paused, placing a hand atop one of my shoulders, shaking it slightly. We're all working hard here, but there's a difference between pushing yourself out of necessity and pushing yourself to fit in. Understand? The captain spoke reassuringly. His piercing eyes remained sharp throughout each and every word. Yes, sir, I understand. Good. Now, second. The past 2 decades were dominated by exceedingly exceptional circumstances. Using that as a benchmark for healthy work ethic is like using the rush to Alpha Centauri as a metric for sustainable extrasolar growth. Suffice it to say, you shouldn't. The man punctuated his speech with a sigh, before finally concluding, You get me, cadet? I get you, sir. I nodded affirmatively, garnering a satisfied expression from the man who continued on, without skipping a beat. The labs and fabs, as you call them, had an arbitrary deadline to reach. 20 years from the unfortunate fate of the first candidate, as requested by the powers on the other side. Or never at all. So they did everything they could to reach it. And like every other story of innovation in human history, they were cutting it pretty tight. I can't blame them though, sir, I added, without a second of hesitation. Oh, I wasn't casting any judgment. If anything, I meant that as a compliment. I mean, discovering a whole new realm of material science, then developing that into something tangible, functional, practical, in a fraction of the time it took to figure out warp-rated hulls. Yeah, it's a miracle we're standing where we are now, I managed out with a confident snigger. A wave of pride, admittedly not of my own, started to well up inside me all the same. It was the same sense of pride you had for being part of something greater than yourself, something so unfathomably big that it manages to overcome, if not completely transcend, seemingly impossible odds. From permanent space habitats to the smashing of the light barrier, and now, the creation of an interdimensional portal. Humanity's story was always one of consistent instability, facilitated by that natural inclination towards teamwork, of different minds with 1,000 different ideas, managing to do what would be impossible for anyone working alone. Forever pushing the envelope, until there was nothing left to push, regardless of the risks involved. I was just happy to be a part of that never-ending story. 15 years of theory, 4 years of iterative design improvements and fabrication, and a whole year dedicated to fabricating just barely enough for the armor and tent. The captain continued on, as I realized I just barely caught the tail end of that whole spiel. It was clear, though, from his wide grin, that he was going through much of what my reverie had just covered. Speaking from an LREF perspective, a year from first-gen proof of concept to a functional manufactured design is incredible, though this is only possible because of the difference in scale of our 2 mission parameters. That last part caused me to cock my head in curiosity. What do you mean, sir? The wonder material the IAS came up with is horrendously unscalable. Its production is time-consuming by its very nature, and is so bizarrely novel that it's incompatible with any industrial process we have. Like I said, it took an entire year to produce enough for your armor and tent. At that rate, it would take us a good century to even coat a corvette to the same extent as your armor. Well, let's just thank the portal people for requesting a single candidate, and not an entire ship, sir. I shot back cheekily. Besides, I doubt that even with the stockpiles we have of prior versions of the stuff, we'd be able to coat even a quarter of a corvette. The captain cracked a short laugh, shaking his head at the thought. That's certainly an idea, all right. Imagine finding another point in space with enough latent quintessence to tunnel up another portal for a ship to fly through. It's not like we haven't tried. The man shrugged, before quickly correcting himself. As in, trying to find another location with latent quintessence, not the ship thing. The ship thing is impossible. The only place with enough latent quintessence is right here, weirdly enough. But, anyways, there's at least one good thing we're using the stockpiles of the previous iterations for. You mean the portal room shielding tiles? Correct. Some say it's overkill, I say it isn't. But that doesn't detract from the fact that the thing's rated for just under 3/4 of your armor's rated mana resistance. When you combine this with the fact that the portal barely leaks out a fraction of a percent of what you'll be dealing with on the other side, the powers that be, most notably the assembly committees, seem alright with it. Speaking for the LREF, though, nothing's ever enough. But speaking in terms of evidence-based considerations, yeah, I'd say it's enough. That isn't stopping me from pushing for a motion for any mana-resistant material produced after this point, to be procured exclusively for the portal room, though. I took a deep breath, nodding as the captain spoke, before steadying myself by shutting my eyes and reaching for the energy drink sat atop another stack of e-ink documents, with 100 variations of the word classified plastered all over them. However, instead of being met by the cold, comforting embrace of a 10-alloy can of sweet, carbonated caffeine, I was instead met with nothing. In fact, I suddenly felt constricted. My loose-fitting nightwear was suddenly replaced by the skin-tight undersuit of my gear, and then enclosed within a thick, solid layer of unyielding composite. I was back inside the power armor. Opening my eyes, I wasn't met by the mid-millennium chic of the IAS rec room. I was instead floating in darkness. An oddly familiar darkness. Confusion consumed me, followed closely by panic. But those two gut-twisting emotions had nothing of what came immediately after, as I began hearing it again. And it was just as otherworldly as when I'd last heard it. It started out exactly the same way, a constant stream of distant chimes, pulsating in intensity from a barely audible pin drop to a soft whisper at its peak. I instinctively reached for my ears, but found my hands unceremoniously slamming against the helmet again, unable to reach them, as the incessant vibration started tickling them, sending wave after wave of shivers down my spine. "Evie?" I shouted, but there was no response. There was only the thrumming darkness growing ever and ever louder. "Evie!" Beep, 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 beep. "Evie!" I jolted up with a raspy shout, panting heavily as my eyes began darting around, my hand instinctively reaching yet again for my sidearm, but finding it firmly trapped within a soft cocoon of canvas. I looked down in confusion, just to be reminded of the sleep sack I found myself snugly tucked into. A sleep sack that I just about managed to squeeze inside the tent, right before the rays of the early morning started to bleed through the dorm's windows. Medical alert. Detecting elevated heart rate, blood pressure, respiratory rate and stress hormones. EEG patterns outside baseline standard. Patterns indicate 1 episode of variable rate night terror. Note: this marks the 2nd night terror logged. Noted, Evie. Thank you. I managed out with a sullen sigh, plonking myself back against the plasticky floor of the tent with a dull thud, cushioned by the padded canvas-like material of my sleeping bag. First the Null, and now our mysterious, noisy, Cthulhian wannabe inhabiting the space between spaces. I paused, before slowly zipping out of the cocoon of canvas, reaching lazily for my tablet. Evie? Yes, Cadet Booker. Set a reminder for me to bring up the mystery of this noisy entity between portals to either Thacia or the library when we have the chance. You know, the one that we encountered after jumping after Maltori through his portal. Set it for, I don't know, a few days from now or something? Affirmative, Cadet Booker. Reminder set. Right. I let out another sharp sigh, before getting up properly this time, rubbing the drool from the corners of my mouth with the backside of my forearm. Diagnostics? I spoke lazily through a yawn, bracing myself against one of the 4 workbenches that had been set up so far, my eyes firmly fixating on the support frame that now held the armor aloft by its shoulder and hips. QSR, all suit systems nominal, Cadet Booker. Are my repairs holding? Affirmative, Cadet Booker. I have run passive mechanical stress tests whilst you were asleep. Repairs were completed within a 1.73% margin of error. Good. Captain Lee would be proud. I let out a grin. The Night Terror episode barely lasted for a quarter of the dream, so I'm going to call this one a win. Plus, at this rate, I'll be rid of them sooner rather than later. I try my best to reassure myself as I move to stand in front of the armor, noting a few scratches on the paint job. Superficial damage aside, however, this avatar of technological exceptionalism was ready for round 2. All right then, I continued, as I began climbing into its vacant back, entering legs first. It's library time. Dragon's Heart Tower, Level 23, Residence 30. Emma and Thacia's bedroom. Local time, 10:40 hours. Emma Booker. A sharp hiss marked my return back into the world of magic and sorcery. This was followed by those first few tentative steps out of the tent, as I paid extra close attention to the mechanical sensor readings, currently superimposed into the upper right-hand corner of my HUD. I began pushing the system slowly, taking short, measured steps, followed by larger and more awkward ones, all with the intent of completing the appropriate calibrations that weren't strictly necessary, but were part of the post-repair recalibration, PRR protocols, that were strongly recommended. Thacia, noticing this, cocked her head towards my general direction, having completely stopped any and all pretenses on finishing the spoonful of nuts and berries, currently in her hand. "Emma, are you certain you're quite all right?" she managed out quizzically, standing up with a degree of obvious concern, as she regarded me with a look of abject confusion. "You seem encumbered." Part of me couldn't help but to feel just a bit embarrassed at having just graced the princess with her first taste of the world of interpretive dance. Another part of me, however, couldn't decide whether or not to just ignore the feeling entirely, given that the armor itself ruined any chance at really being socially acceptable here. "Yeah, I'm fine," I finally managed out, once more finding myself attempting, and yet again failing, to rub the back of my head reflexively. "It's part of the procedure in making sure that my repairs are working, is all," I explained away simply, which was followed up by a tentative nod from the princess. "A ritual of sorts," she concluded with a tentative nod. "Right then, I have sent for breakfast so that we may—" The princess stopped herself in her tracks, before placing a hand over her beak. "Apologies, Emma. Your dietary restrictions slipped my mind. I was admittedly a bit overeager to prepare for the day ahead, by preemptively having a meal ready for the both of us. It's fine, Thacia," I quickly interrupted the apologetic avian, with a single tap on her shoulder, shooting her a smile despite knowing full well the obvious fact that a barrier of composite and glass stood in the way between us. "I appreciate the gesture all the same." Thacia's eyes seemed transfixed on the hand, before shifting to meet my gaze once again, as she nodded once in affirmation. "I value your compassionate nature, Emma." I slowly removed my hand at that, prompting Thacia to shift a bit in place, before craning her head towards the door. "With that being said, I must apologize for being the lesser of compassionate spirits in this instance, by insisting that we cut straight through the clouds." She pulled out that same pocket watch-like device from a few days earlier, its round golden surface glowing a dull green and yellow hue, displaying a series of alien symbols that the Eevee could not translate. "We have approximately an hour before noon, and from then we have half a day left to complete the procurement of school supplies from the town, in accordance with the window of grace the Academy has afforded us." I nodded once. "Then let's hit the library first. It should be a quick in and out." "Very well then," Thacia nodded, pocketing her watch as the both of us left, to regroup with Thalmin. Dragon's Heart Tower, Level 23, Residence 30, Living Room, Local Time 10:45 hours. Emma Booker. The Lupinor Prince was waiting for us right outside our door. Despite being of a completely different species, the frustrated features of a canine were definitely not lost on me, as those bared fangs and scrunched up nose did little to hide his current state of mind. Though, from the looks of things, I could tell this frustration certainly wasn't instigated by us, as his features lightened up just a bit as we finally exchanged words. "Morning, Thalmin," I chirped out. "A bright morning to you, Emma," Thalmin managed out with a forced smile, before shifting gears to a tentative sigh, though I wish I could say that with wholeheartedness. "What's wrong?" "This." Thalmin moved towards his dorm's entrance, gripping the handle tight before pushing it inwards with a forceful thud. "Alert! Localized surge of mana radiation detected. 140% above background radiation levels." Only to have it slam in his face just seconds after. This was accompanied by a slight but noticeable series of hisses from what I could only assume was the only other inhabitant of the room. "This is what's wrong," Thalmin continued with a resonant growl. "The blue thing refuses to leave his room, and what's more, he refuses to even acknowledge the simple reason of why." Thacia's eyes narrowed, zeroing in on Thalmin's. "Has he shown any signs of other peculiar behaviors?" Not necessarily, just the usual, with the addition of this unexpected development.
I see. This may become more of an issue in tomorrow's house-choosing ceremony. Thacia spoke, with a high-pitched series of chirps, each one more exasperated than the next. Regardless, that is a matter for the following day. If Lord Rolaria insists on being unruly, then we must move forward without...
Thacia paused mid-sentence, or rather her voice had completely trailed off as both her and Thalmin's eyes were now completely trained on me. Walking past the pair, I positioned myself right in front of the door, before forcing it open with yet another loud slam.
Alert! Localized surge of mana radiation detected. 140% above background radiation levels.
This was, expectantly, followed up by the door being forcibly closed by the Venerian's magic, to which I had a simple counter. A simple foot in the door.
Warning. Minimum pain threshold on right foot has been exceeded. Auto disconnect of haptic feedback engaged.
This forced the millennia-old wood to buckle and creak concerningly, as the rest of the door above my foot began to bow and bend, yet was unable to overcome the space-age composites comprising my boot. A series of sharp, threatening hisses soon followed, flooding the living room, as both Thacia and Thalmin began peering awkwardly in from behind me, their heads popping up on one of my rear-view live feeds.
Eleanor?
I managed out for a frustrated sigh.
Coming out, buddy. Do you need to talk, or...
This is my private domicile, and I will not be harassed.
Come on. You can tell us if there's something wrong. Thalmin here is worried.
I will say nothing more. In this room I shall reside, and in this room I shall remain.
Right, I responded with a half-hearted sigh. Okay, buddy. We'll be back sometime later today, okay? Just call room service if you need snacks or something. I'm going to pull my foot away from the door now, alright?
With little acknowledgement aside from a sudden reduction in mana, I slowly pulled my foot away from the wedged door.
Alert! Localized surge of mana radiation detected. 140% above background radiation levels.
Before being met by a resounding slam once more.
Right then, I spoke, with yet again another sigh, turning towards Thacia and Thalmin, who had since regained their respective composure. It's library time.
The Transgression Academy for the Magical Arts. En route to the library. Local time, 11:20 hours. Emma Booker. Once again, the trip to the library saw us exiting the main structure of the castle, through two unassuming double doors, and towards a large open promenade with little to nothing in the way of exterior decor, compared to the many open-air outcroppings along the academy proper. The howling winds hit all three of us first, followed by the loud roaring of the waterfall behind us, logging in at the same deafening 91 decibels. The stark white tower soaring hundreds of stories overhead lay in front of us. The spindly single-lane bridge connecting it to the academy stood in the same place as it always had. But unlike before, the bridge wasn't empty. In fact, it was packed. At least 40 or so gargoyles occupied the single-lane bridge, remaining so still that anyone seeking the structure for the first time could have easily mistaken them for part of some centuries-old blockade. Strangely, though, the blockade seemed to occupy just the first half of the bridge, with the latter half being completely empty and devoid of any obstructions. What I could only describe as a guard post had been assembled at the entrance to the bridge, assembled out of cobblestone and timber, with an imposing roof that was, as expected, host to 4 perching gargoyles. A small gaggle of 4 students were gathered around the guard post. Their uniforms looked to be a bit more decorated than Thacia's, implying that they were probably second years. "You lot, halt!" a voice echoed from the guard post, as a taller, older elf emerged, quickly fastening a cloak to a uniform
that was even more decorated than the others. The man was an apprentice. Once again, evidenced by the uniform that resembled Lariel's. Alert! Localized surge of mana radiation detected. 340% above background radiation levels. A brief mana radiation warning was all that was needed for him to blip between the guardhouse and the door we just entered through, as the taller elf squared off against the three of us, with a purposeful whoosh of his cape. "What are you miscreants doing about here, then?" I managed out slowly, much to Thasia's dismay, as it was clear she had wanted to take charge of the talks. "I think that much is obvious." I gestured to the library in the far distance. "We're headed to the library, sir. And honestly, I haven't heard of a learning institution of all places preemptively calling a bunch of library-goers and knowledge-seekers miscreants." I shot back, with a series of polite yet snappy responses. "Oh ho ho. Is that how it is, then?" the man responded with a cocky smirk. "Just a jolly old perusal of this here compendium of all the knowledge of the realms that ever has been and that will be?" Yes. I turned around purposefully, meeting both Thalmin and Thasia's expectant gazes. What else are we going to do at the library? What else are we going to do at the library, they say? The man scoffed back, before making a point to unfurl a ridiculously long scroll and clearing his throat. "By the order of His Academic Excellency, the Dean, and the powers bestowed upon him by the authority of the Nexus." Alert! Localized surge of mana radiation detected. 340% above background radiation levels. The elf was interrupted by the teleporting arrival of a similarly dressed apprentice, who arrived simply to whisper into his ear, before disappearing almost just as quickly. Alert! Localized surge of mana radiation detected. 340% above background radiation levels. "Ah, very well then. Consider yourselves fortunate, for it shall not be I, but the Dean himself, that shall be addressing this matter, and the matter which has become the talk of the town." "And what do you mean?" "Shush, shush, shush, shush," the man interrupted, reaching his index finger forward towards my vocoder, which I immediately pulled away from. "An emergency assembly has been called. Attendance is compulsory. Letters confirming as such have been dispatched to all dorms. Proceed to the Grand Assembly Hall and be out of my hair. I have more important matters to attend to." He shooed us off, before promptly blipping back into the guardhouse. Alert! Localized surge of mana radiation detected. 340% above background radiation levels. Whilst that interaction was weird at best, I couldn't help but to feel just a bit nervous about the sudden and unexpected turn of events, as the three of us reluctantly headed back inside. "Well, Emma, it would seem as if there might be some merit to your theory of a potential shift in academy scheduling after all," Thalmin began with a nervous smile. "So what now?" I asked, turning to face the pair. "We attend the assembly. There is no other choice in the matter, Emma," Thasia quickly added. "I guess this means we're calling off library time for now." The Transgration Academy for the Magical Arts, en route to the Grand Assembly Hall. Local time, 11:45 hours. Emma Booker. There was no question about it. There would have been no way we could have made it to the Grand Assembly Hall in time if it wasn't for the horde of students that had inadvertently led the way there, like a herd of sheep making their way to the slaughter. Okay, maybe that's not the best metaphor to use here, but I digress. It was very much clear the announcement had reached the eyes and ears of everyone around the same time we were informed, which means the library itself was blockaded before this whole announcement was made. Which made things even more confusing, but at the same time made me all the more curious as to what could be going on, or more accurately, what the faculty could be cooking up. Upon arriving at the Grand Assembly Hall, however, we were met at the entrance by a parallel duo of Rolands, swords outstretched towards each other. At the bases of these knightly statues were decorated stretches of parchments, bearing and receiving names of students that entered. We were shuffled into a queue like the rest of the students, quite a few of them giving me questioning glances, but most of them simply going about their way, clearly more focused on the assembly itself rather than my armoured form. As we finally got to the front of the queue, we were once again reacquainted with a familiar face. Or, more accurately, with a familiar lack of a face. As the hooded and cloaked shadow-faced apprentice we'd met from the medical wing now stood guard next to the statues. His two glowing orbs for eyes shifted to a more polite, amiable, and friendly half-lidded semicircles that more resembled emojis than an actual face. "Greetings, Princess Thacia Delani." The man spoke with a courteous, polite bow, actually taking the time to hold up the cue as he went all in on the expectant decorum game. "I see fate has once more granted us the privilege of meeting. Now, what can I do for you today?" Thacia responded with a bow of her own, taking a good 10 seconds to complete before meeting the man's gaze as best she could. The polite customer service smile taking over her visage, like a well-rehearsed role she was born for. "And greetings to you as well, Senior Apprentice, Appointed Deputy Magistrate, Sir Ostoy. We are here for the compulsory assembly at the behest of the Dean." "Oh, please. Senior Apprentice Sir Arlen Ostoy will be sufficient." The man shot back with a polite chuckle. "And, yes, of course. What else could you be here for?" The vapid, directionless conversations threatened to rear back its ugly head if not for a tap on the shoulder from one of the other apprentices lining the doors to the Grand Assembly Hall, motioning their head to the cramped collection of annoyed students that were being held up behind us. Yes, well, it seems like everything is in order here," the man trailed off, his eyes darting between Thacia, Thalwyn, and myself, before pointing at an empty space right next to us. "I must apologize for the inconvenience here, Princess Delani. However, my roster informs me that your peer group consists of a total of 4 persons. Is that correct?"
"That is correct, Senior Apprentice Sir Arlen Ostoy."
"With that being the case, where is your 4th peer?"
"He is currently in our residence, Senior Apprentice Sir Arlen Ostoy."
This back and forth ended with a shift in the apprentice's face, as his 2 glowing eyes narrowed to an impossibly thin line, before shifting to one of wary concern. "His presence will be required, Princess Delani. Without it, you may find there will be consequences for the entirety of your peer group." He spoke in an uncharacteristically straightforward manner, cutting right to the chase as all 3 of us looked at each other with a renewed sense of concern. "However, considering I have previously had the distinct pleasure of being acquainted with your peer group star student," he gave Thacia a polite, respectful nod, "I will allow 2 of you to enter. The 3rd must take full responsibility in the retrieval of your 4th peer. Now..." The man paused, grabbing what seemed to be a timepiece of his own before pocketing it. "You have just under an hour to accomplish this. Considering it takes 15 minutes to return to your dorms and back again, I suggest you take flight immediately." He nodded once, giving Thacia a brief wink at that pitiful attempt at a pun.
"All right, I'll—"
"No, I volunteer," Thalwyn interjected, with a resounding rumble in his throat.
"Thalwyn, it's fine, I can run pretty quickly."
"After everything? No. I will not allow myself to fall into further dishonor by having all of the burdens of this peer group falling upon your shoulders, Emma." Thalwyn spoke earnestly, and with a resounding sense of finality.
"All right," I sighed. "All right then, I wish you the best of luck, Thalwyn," I concluded, before giving the wolf one more appreciative nod before he sped off, impressively, and literally disappearing into the crowd of students. "Alert! Localized surge of matter radiation detected. 220% above background radiation levels." With Thalmin gone, the hooded apprentice quickly ushered us inside. Making our way in, Thacia promptly led me up higher and higher into the plush, opera theatre-like seats. It certainly wasn't just your rank-and-file bleachers or your crammed-together stadium seats, that's for certain. Here, this is our peer group's assigned seating, Emma, Thacia pointed out, at a small enclosed row of seats with no clearly defined signage or anything to indicate it was ours at all. Wait, this? How can you tell? Ah, it's this, Emma. Thacia quickly waved over the side of the enclosed canopy, revealing the letters corresponding to our dorm room. It's a mana thing, isn't it? I can't see it because I can't sense the mana streams or whatever. Correct, Emma. Thacia nodded once in reply. Right, I spoke, with a mix of frustration but also nervousness, as my eyes kept track of the time, and the countdown timer the Eevee had once again conveniently placed at the top right-hand corner of my HUD. Dragon's Heart Tower, Level 23, Residence 30, Living Room, Local Time, 12:10 hours. Thalmin. I arrived back at the dorms with a huff and a puff, though it wasn't so much the sprint that drained me. It was more so the frustration at navigating through this labyrinth of a castle, even with the mana streams attempting to guide the way forward. Slamming the door open without a moment's hesitation, I marched my way over to my room, and the source of all of my current grievances. I let out a breath, steadying myself, before bracing my right shoulder as I ran my way in through the door, making sure not to give the Venerian a slight chance to properly fortify himself within. "Eleanor!" I shouted, only to find that the room was empty. I looked around, glancing at every corner, before slamming the door behind me shut, making sure the little thing couldn't skitter out from behind me. But as quickly as I did so, and upon trying my best to sense any other presence from within the mana streams, I was met with a resounding nothing. The lizard was gone.